Well, let me begin. When was the first time that I met Father Arrupe? I met him really only two times, so I can't say that I know him personally very well. The first time was in Indonesia in 1969. I had just joined the Jesuits in Indonesia, but in those days, Indonesia, when I joined, it was still a mission. It wasn't a full province on its own. And I was only there a few months when Father Arrupe came on a visit to the country to announce in Yogyakarta, Indonesia, the establishment of the new province of Indonesia. And I was there at the beginning of it. And of course, we were all overjoyed. We were overjoyed to see him, and we were overjoyed with the good news that he brought us. And since I was still so young and new in the Jesuits, to me it was a grace of joy, thinking, oh, this is I'm really here and I'm part of this, and God's calling me here, and it was a wonderful moment. Of course, I didn't get really a chance to talk to him. There were several hundred of us Jesuits. Father Arrupe, and we all had a chance to shake his hand and say hello. But that was the first time I met him. And then I was in Indonesia the next 10, 12 years or so, and he was back in Rome as general. And then it was time for me in, I think it was 1980 or 81, to do my tertianship, my third year of formation. And so I was on a tertian experiment. I was in Alaska, actually, in the Eskimo village as a parish priest. This is one of these stories that they tell you about in the mission, and you think is never going to happen. But in fact, it did happen to me. One day, the postman pulled up on his dog sled and dropped off for me a letter from Father Arrupe. And I opened the letter, and it said, Father Tom, I want you to stop in Rome on your way back to Indonesia when you finish tertianship, because I have a new assignment for you. You'll be working in the Vatican in the Council for Interreligious Dialogue. See, my background academically was in Arabic and Islamic studies, and they were looking for somebody in the Vatican to head the Office of Relations with Muslims. And so Father Arrupe called me back from after I finished in Alaska, and then to Rome, and then back to Indonesia to pack up my bags. And so it really kind of changed my life. But the interesting thing about this was Father Arrupe said, be sure you're here before certain day. I think it was like the 30th of July or something. He said, because the next day I'm leaving for the Philippines, and I want to meet you and talk to you before you come. So I did, and I met him. And at the time he said, I'm leaving tomorrow for the Philippines. And it was on that trip that he had his stroke and was sick and really couldn't handle the work of being general any longer. He remained sick for, I don't know, a couple of years, and eventually he died from that illness. So I've often thought later on, I may have been, and probably was, his last appointment, because he was leaving for the Philippines on the next day. And the day before, he said, I'm reassigning you to Rome and the Vatican. But that's all that I have ever really met Father Arrupe personally. But like all Jesuits of my time, we just we drank in everything that he wrote and everything he was. Sometimes he was called the second founder of the Jesuits, and I think in a way he really was. He really. Well, let's look at it's kind of the spiritual dimension first. Whole question of discernment. We didn't talk much about discernment. We took our vows and we lived our life, but you never heard about Jesuits discerning. And he got our historians to go back and look at the way that the first Jesuits lived and how they discerned step by step what they were going to do, whether this was the way God was calling them or whether this was from some impulse that was not from God, from a bad spirit. And step by step, they would move forward under the guidance of the Spirit through their discerning. So that during his time as general, this became pretty much a characteristic way of Jesuits thinking and approaching life, approaching decisions. And until even today, other religious orders, lay people, even people who are non-Catholic Christians, they know that Jesuits mean discernment. Well, that came from Father Arrupe. Before him, it wasn't a big part of our thinking. It was always there in the history books, but it really wasn't lived out much. I think a second way that he really influenced us a lot was by the exercises. Before the time of Father Arrupe, the exercises were usually preached by somebody to a big group of Jesuits, usually. It was mainly for Jesuits. Once a year, sometimes 200, 300 Jesuits, 50, 60 Jesuits would pile into a big auditorium, and somebody would deliver points 3 times a day or maybe 5 times a day. But this person who delivered the points, very often the points were read. Probably more often than not, he would read it, and you would kind of sit there and listen, and then you would try to pray about them. But Father Arrupe really changed our understanding of what a retreat could be. Could be a personal encounter with God through the Holy Spirit. Coming to listen to God. He kept emphasizing that the retreat director was not the master telling us what to do and not to do. He said the retreat master, the best thing he could do is to stay out of the way of the Holy Spirit, to let the Holy Spirit work as well as the Spirit wanted to in our lives. And everybody found it so much more rewarding, found it to be the kind of experience that Ignatius himself had when he was in Manresa and he was wondering what to do with his life. He's allowed the Holy Spirit to guide him. He had allowed himself to be led not by another human, but by God himself in the Holy Spirit. And since then, this whole idea of personally directed retreats, small retreats, everybody's doing it. It's had an effect not just on Jesuits, but all over the world. In our retreat house in Chiang Rai, we have every year, we don't have enough rooms in the retreat house. People are coming. We have big groups of Christians of other churches. Every year they book a number of rooms. I've been there once. A group of Muslims from Indonesia came to make their retreat. This is something that they found helpful. God would guide them by following the techniques that St. Ignatius offered. Many Catholic lay people, Catholics of other religious orders are making this up. Well, this all is a long-term and distant effect of the work of Saint Ignatius or Saint Father Arrupe. I keep calling him Saint. He's not Saint yet. I remember after he died, I was in Rome. I was by that time living at the Roman Curia and working in the Vatican. And very often in the evenings, we would go down to the Jesuit church. And you had to climb over a little barrier. Why they ever kept that barrier there, I don't know. But there was a barrier. But being young, we could climb over it and pray at the tomb of Father Arrupe. And our prayer most often was just basically, thank you. Thank you for all you've done for us as Jesuits. Thank you for what you've done for the church and many, many people that we don't know who they are. I think that the thing that he communicated so much was joy. Whenever he had meetings with Jesuits, big groups, small groups, people were really happy. And there was a real atmosphere of joy. I experienced that in Indonesia back in 1969. And I've seen it many times in videos and in films and that since then. But he just had a way of communicating the joy of the resurrection, the joy of Christian living, the joy of being close to God. And he just sort of exuded it. It reminds me of the words of St. Paul in Ephesians. He says, live in such a way that when people see how you live and act, they'll see Christ. Isn't that really what we're called to? I learned that in a very practical way from Father Arrupe. And the other thing that I think the big way he influenced the lives of so many of us, especially Jesuits, was this sense of being a fraternal community, of friends in the Lord, of brothers working together to do something good in this world, to work for God's greater glory. You know, what a great project this is. And to do this in a joyful, exciting way with your brothers who share this idea. I think this is the way he communicated it to us, that it wasn't just a bunch of dry text from a long time ago, but it was the living. One example I want to give you. It's kind of a silly example, but a real one. Up until the time of Father Arrupe was elected general, in the Jesuit Curia in Rome, there was only one table in this, and they had a huge dining room, big dining room, and started all the way down from the door to the kitchen on the right, went all the way down the long length of the hall, all the way around, turned left, and then made another turn back to the doorway, and every Jesuit sat in his assigned place according to what day he entered the society. The oldest one was here near the door of the kitchen, and then the next one next to him, next one next to him, next one next to him, all the way down to the youngest Jesuit who just took his vows near the door. And then, of course, when somebody would die, then everybody move up one. Meals were in silence. Well, not totally in silence, because there's always reading. They would read a book to us. Usually the history of the Jesuits in one place or another, history of the Jesuits in Latin America, history of the Jesuits in the Middle East, history of the Jesuits in India, whatever. But there was no communication. It was all in silence. Brothers walked around serving food to all the fathers, and nobody talked. Well, when Father Arrupe came to Rome as general, immediately he said to the people there, he says, let's change this system. He says, I want small tables with 5 chairs at a table, and I want people to be sitting together and talking to each other, talking about their lives, about their work, about their joys, just sharing lives. And I think that's so much of what had not been going on before the time of Father Arrupe. And he says, all of us, including myself, are going to be serving the meals, even to the youngest Jesuits. You know, a completely different way of looking at community life than we had before him. So that up until today, we think, well, this is the way it is everywhere in the society. And I think it is. But it wasn't before the days of Father Arrupe. Similarly, he wanted us to be open to the world. He wanted us to get out of our houses and our comfortable daily routines and get messed up. You know, you hear the words of Pope Francis, and he's saying things like, he's saying, I want my priests to get their hands dirty. I want them to have the smell of the sheep and the smell of the goats on them. I want them to be mixing with people. I want them to be getting down where they can really help people and do something in their lives. Well, that came originally from Father Arrupe, the Pope today, Pope Francis, and all the ways that he's been able to influence people around the world in the church. He himself was influenced so much by Father Arrupe, and he tells us that over and over. The other thing, when Pope Francis says, I want joyful priests. Don't want sad people. I don't want people who are frowners and scolders. I want people who are going to bring joy to people. It is, as I mentioned before, this was the charism of Father Arrupe that he communicated us. Well, I'm coming near the end of my allotted time, but I did want to save this for last because I think of all the things that Father Arrupe did, he taught us to pray. You know, you look back in our history books, the number of prayers by our generals, very few. Many of the generals didn't have any. They didn't see that as part of their job. Their job was to administer things and keep order and to appoint people and that. That's what they were appointed for. They hoped they had a deep spiritual life themselves, but they didn't see that was one of the things that they were called to communicate. Father Arrupe, on the other hand, has written some beautiful prayers. There are even websites of Arrupe prayers where you can look them up. And at times when I find it hard to pray, I really can get a lot of inspiration. We Jesuits learned a lot about prayer from St. Ignatius. And also we've learned a lot about prayer from Father Arrupe. I want to close my talk with my favorite prayer. And I think part of the fact is that I am 84 right now. Father Arrupe was 83 when he died, so I've lived longer than him. But when about 8 years, I think, before, when he had his stroke and he wasn't able to govern the society anymore, he made this prayer, and it's a short prayer of just 6 lines. And when you get to be my age, you'll see what he's talking about. He says, "More than ever, I find myself in the hands of God. Now, this is what I have wanted all my life from my youth. But now there is a difference. Now the initiative is entirely with God. It is indeed a profound spiritual experience to know and feel myself so totally in God's hand." Thank you.